Cardi B just won a $24 million lawsuit back in August, walked out of that courtroom victorious, and thought she was finally done with the drama. But guess what? It's not over, not even close. The security guard who sued her is now demanding a new trial, and there's a hearing scheduled for December 5th that could potentially drag this entire mess back into court. We're talking about a case that's been going on since 2020, almost 5 years of back and forth, and just when Cardi thought she could move on, here comes round two. The security guard's lawyer has filed papers claiming the verdict was wrong, that there wasn't enough evidence to support what the jury decided, and that there were legal errors during the trial. They haven't submitted the full motion with all the details yet, so we don't know exactly what arguments they're planning to make. But what we do know is that Cardi is probably exhausted from dealing with this, especially since the jury took less than an hour to decide she was innocent. So let's break down how this entire situation started, what both sides claimed happened, and why this case is suddenly back from the dead when it seemed completely settled. The whole situation goes back to 2018, when Cardi B was pregnant with her first child, Culture. At the time, nobody knew she was expecting because she was keeping it extremely private. She went to a doctor's office in Beverly Hills for a pregnancy-related appointment, and she was doing everything she could to keep her visit discreet. This was before she announced the pregnancy publicly, so maintaining privacy was crucial for her. Working at the building that day was a security guard named Emani Ellis. Now, what happened during that visit depends entirely on who you ask, because Emani and Cardi tell two completely different versions of the story. According to the lawsuit that followed, something went down between them that was serious enough for Emani to file a $24 million claim against Cardi. That's not a small amount. When someone is suing for that much money, they're either claiming severe damages or they're going for a major payday. The incident allegedly happened inside the building, and whatever took place that day set off a legal battle that would drag on for years. At the time, Cardi was focused on her career and her pregnancy, and the last thing she needed was a confrontation that would end up in court. But that's exactly what happened, and it became one of those cases where both parties stuck to their stories and refused to back down.
Emani Ellis painted a very specific picture of what she claimed went down that day. According to her version, Cardi B physically attacked her. She alleged there was physical contact, described the confrontation as aggressive, and said Cardi called her all kinds of offensive names. These aren't minor accusations. She claimed she needed medical treatment, though the jury didn't find supporting evidence. That's a huge claim because if it were true, there would need to be medical records, photos of injuries, and probably witnesses who saw the aftermath. Emani was suing for $24 million based on these allegations, which suggests she was claiming significant physical and emotional damage. Her story positioned Cardi as the aggressor, who came at her unprovoked and caused harm that required medical intervention to fix. But here's the thing, when you make claims like that, you need evidence to back them up. You need witnesses, documentation, medical proof, and a timeline that makes sense. And as the case went to trial, questions started coming up about whether Emani actually had the evidence to support what she was saying. On the other side, Cardi B and witnesses who were present that day told a completely different story. According to Cardi, she walked into the building and noticed that Emani was on her phone. Cardi believed Emani was trying to record her or notify people that she was there, which would have blown her cover and exposed her pregnancy before she was ready to announce it. Remember, this was a private medical appointment, and Cardi had every reason to want discretion. So she confronted Emani about it. Cardi admits that things got heated. She's been very clear that they argued and that it was a loud and intense confrontation. But Cardi swears up and down that she never laid a hand on that woman, not once. She maintained that no physical contact occurred. Her version is that it was a verbal argument that never crossed into physical violence. And apparently, other people who were there backed up Cardi's account of what happened.
When the case finally went to trial in August, the jury heard both sides, reviewed the evidence, and came to a decision remarkably fast. They deliberated for less than an hour. That's significant because when a jury comes back that quickly, it usually means the case was pretty clear-cut in their minds. They found Cardi B innocent and not liable for any of the claims Emani had made. Essentially, the jury said Cardi didn't do what she was accused of, and the jury ultimately rejected the $24 million claim she was seeking. If you followed the trial or saw clips from it, One thing that stood out to a lot of people was the performance of Emani's lawyer. Multiple commentators noted that some observers felt the plaintiff's team struggled during the trial, that certain arguments didn't appear to convince the jury, and that the overall presentation wasn't strong. When your legal representation isn't effectively arguing your position or challenging the other side's evidence, it makes it much harder to win. The jury sided with Cardi because the evidence and witness testimonies supported her version of events. There were no credible witnesses backing up Emani's claims that she was physically attacked. There wasn't compelling medical evidence showing injuries that required medical treatment, and Cardi's account, supported by others who were present, painted a picture of a verbal argument that never became physical. So the jury made their decision quickly, and Cardi walked away victorious. She had every reason to believe this nightmare was finally over after years of dealing with it. But clearly, Emani and her legal team weren't ready to accept that outcome. But something happened outside the courthouse after the trial that might now come back to haunt Cardi. As she was leaving, a reporter asked her an extremely disrespectful question. The reporter brought up a personal, family-related rumor, essentially trying to embarrass Cardi in a public setting right after she just won her case. Cardi's response was to toss her microphone toward the reporter, calling out the disrespect and questioning why men feel comfortable asking women such inappropriate and invasive questions. She specifically said that women don't ask her those types of things, and she challenged the reporter about whether his mother taught him to respect women. The whole incident was caught on camera and went viral. At the time, people had mixed reactions. Some felt the reporter deserved it for asking such a tasteless question, especially in that moment. Others thought Cardi should have kept her composure, regardless of the provocation. But here's why this matters now. According to sources, Emani and her lawyer are allegedly planning to use that courthouse outburst as part of their argument for a new trial. The theory would be that Cardi's behavior outside the courthouse demonstrates something they may try to frame as relevant to their argument, which they could argue supports Emani's original claims that Cardi attacked her back in 2018. Now, legally speaking, that's a stretch. What happened outside the courthouse after the trial is a separate incident involving a different person in a completely different context. But if they're looking for any angle to get a new trial, they might try to suggest it reflects how tense the situation was for Cardi in that moment. Whether a judge would actually consider that relevant to the original case is another question entirely.
Emani's lawyer has officially filed papers requesting a new trial, and there's a hearing scheduled for December 5th where a judge will decide whether to grant it. In the filing, they're claiming that the verdict was wrong and that there wasn't sufficient evidence to support what the jury decided. They're also alleging that there were legal errors during the trial, though they haven't yet submitted the full motion with all the specific details of what those errors supposedly were. This is important because you can't just ask for a new trial because you lost. You have to show that something went. Emani's lawyer has officially filed papers requesting a new trial, and there's a hearing scheduled for December 5th, where a judge will decide whether to grant it. In the filing, they're claiming that the verdict was wrong and that there wasn't sufficient evidence to support what the jury decided. They're also alleging that there were legal errors during the trial, though they haven't yet submitted the full motion with all the specific details of what those errors supposedly were. This is important because you can't just ask for a new trial because you lost. You have to show that something went fundamentally wrong during the legal process that affected the outcome. Maybe the judge made a ruling that was legally incorrect. Maybe evidence was improperly admitted or excluded. Maybe there was jury misconduct. But you need concrete reasons, not just disappointment with the result. Right now, we don't know exactly what arguments Emani's team is planning to make because the full motion hasn't been filed yet. But based on what's been reported, they seem to be going after the trial process itself, claiming it was flawed in some way. There's also been speculation about them bringing up the courthouse incident, unconfirmed claims about threats, speculation about supposed witnesses who haven't been verified, or arguments about possible errors during the trial process. However, none of that has been confirmed in actual court documents yet. It might just be what they're planning to include in their official motion when they finally submit it. The December 5th hearing will be crucial because that's when the judge will hear their arguments and decide whether there's enough merit to justify putting Cardi through another trial. After Cardi won the first trial, she made it very clear that she was done playing games with claims she felt were unfounded. She stated publicly that she didn't touch that woman,
that she never laid hands on her, and that the next person who tries to come at her with claims she believes are false is gonna face a countersuit. She said she would make them pay for wasting her time and dragging her through unnecessary legal battles. So the big question now is whether Cardi is going to follow through on that promise and countersue Emani for bringing this case back after losing. At this point, it would be understandable if she did. This case has been going on since 2020. That's almost 5 years of dealing with depositions, court dates, legal fees, stress, and having this hanging over her head. She went through a full trial, the jury sided with her in less than an hour, and now she's being dragged back into it because Emani won't accept the outcome. From Cardi's perspective, this has become an ongoing issue she still has to address. The jury made their decision. There were no witnesses supporting Emani's story. There was no compelling evidence of the injuries she claimed. It really did seem, at least from Cardi's side, like a lawsuit her team viewed as exaggerated, and now instead of moving on, Emani is trying to get a second chance at that $24 million payday. The frustrating part for Cardi is that even if the judge denies the request for a new trial, she still has to show up to the December 5th hearing, still has to have her lawyers prepare arguments, and still has to deal with this situation taking up space in her life.
So where does this leave us? Cardi B won her case decisively, with a jury taking less than an hour to declare her not guilty and not liable. But Emani Ellis and her lawyer aren't letting it go. They've filed for a new trial, claiming the verdict was wrong and that there were legal errors, though they haven't provided the full details yet. There's speculation that they might try to use Cardi's courthouse outburst against her, arguing it shows a pattern of aggression. The hearing is set for December 5th, and a judge will decide whether there's enough justification to grant a new trial or whether this case is finally, truly over. For Cardi, this has to be exhausting. 5 years of dealing with a lawsuit where she maintained from the beginning that she never touched anyone, where the evidence backed her up, and where a jury agreed with her. And yet here she is, still fighting. The question is whether the judge will see this new trial request as legitimate, or whether it's exactly what it looks like, which is someone who lost a case and is continuing to challenge the outcome. Cardi has already said she's ready to countersue if people keep coming at her with claims she believes aren't accurate. So if this gets dragged out even further, don't be surprised if she makes good on that threat. What do you think? Should Emani get a new trial, or is this case closed and she needs to move on? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, hit that like button, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any updates on what happens at that December 5th hearing.